Jake's eyes snapped open as a loud, urgent bark pierced through the quiet of the night. It was Max, his faithful German shepherd, and the dog never barked like that unless something was wrong. Gradually, Jake rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock beside his bed. It was well past midnight. Most of the camp was asleep, and the cold night air outside had settled into a deep silence. But Max was not settling down. The barking grew louder and more desperate. "Max!" Jake called, sitting up and swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "What's going on?" Max's barking was now joined by the sound of growling, followed by a sudden silence. Jake grabbed his rifle, his heart starting to beat faster. He had been in enough dangerous situations to know when something wasn't right. Max only made that kind of noise when there was something out there. Something dangerous. Jake pulled on his boots and hurried to the door. As he stepped out into the cool night, he saw Max in the distance, standing at the edge of the woods, staring into the dark. "Max, here boy," Jake called, trying to calm the dog down. Max's head snapped to him, his eyes wide with intensity. Without a second thought, Max darted into the woods, his powerful legs cutting through the underbrush like a shadow. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed his flashlight, his rifle, and followed quickly behind. The forest was dense, the trees towering high above them, and the moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. Max's barking echoed off the trees, leading Jake further into the woods. The dog was relentless, his barks growing fainter and fainter as they went deeper. "Max!" Jake called again, but his voice only disappeared into the night. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding louder with each step. After what seemed like an eternity, Jake's flashlight caught movement in the distance. He could barely make out a figure, something lying on the ground. His breath caught in his throat. Max was there, standing by the figure, his body rigid. The dog's eyes were wide with alertness, and his body tensed as if ready to spring into action. Jake approached cautiously, his rifle raised in case of danger. But what he saw next stopped him in his tracks. A figure, a humanoid form, lay in the dirt, covered in blood. It wasn't human. It was something else. Jake's flashlight flickered over the figure's strange, armored body, and his heart skipped a beat. It was an alien, one of the enemy scouts. The creature's armor was battered and dented, as if it had been in a brutal fight. The alien's skin was a sickly gray, and its breathing was shallow. It was barely conscious. Max whined softly and moved closer to the alien, sniffing it carefully. Jake's instincts told him to shoot, to kill it before it could be a threat. But something inside him held him back. The alien's eyes flickered open for a brief moment, and Jake saw the fear in them. The creature was not here to fight. It was hurt, helpless. "Max!" Jake whispered, looking down at his dog. The dog's tail wagged slightly, but he didn't step away from the alien. It was almost as if Max was protecting it. Jake hesitated. He had never been the kind of soldier to show mercy to the enemy, but something about this situation felt different. He knelt beside the alien, careful not to get too close in case it attacked. The creature groaned, its hand twitching toward Jake as if it was reaching out for help. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" Jake muttered, still unsure what to do. He could hear his commanding officer's voice in his head, ordering him to eliminate the enemy. But for some reason, Jake couldn't do it. This alien was different. It wasn't a soldier, it was just alone. Max stood guard beside Jake, his eyes never leaving the alien. His growl had softened into something protective, almost like he understood. The alien's hand finally reached Jake's arm, gripping it weakly. The creature's voice was hoarse when it spoke. "Help me," it rasped. Jake's heart skipped. He could barely believe his ears. The alien wasn't begging for its life. It was asking for help. Max whined softly, his body lowering to the ground beside the alien. Jake looked down at his dog, who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. "Max, stay," Jake ordered softly, but the dog didn't move. Instead, Max nuzzled the alien's hand gently, his eyes full of a strange sympathy. Jake's mind raced. He was trained to fight, to defend humanity against any enemy, yet here he was, standing in the woods with an injured alien who was asking for help. The world was at war, and yet this alien had no one. No army, no allies, just an enemy who had turned their back on her. What kind of enemy would leave their own to die in the woods? "All right," Jake muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. "I'll help you. But if this turns out to be a trap, I'll kill you myself." The alien's eyes fluttered closed, as if it had no strength left to respond. Jake took a deep breath, making up his mind. There was no turning back now. Max barked once, low and serious, as if to say, "This is the right thing to do." Jake wasn't sure if he believed that, but he was going to try. Carefully, he scooped the alien into his arms, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He turned back toward the camp, Max trotting closely by his side, leading the way. Tonight, everything was about to change. Jake had no idea what he was doing. As he carried the wounded alien through the thick woods, his mind raced. Every step he took felt like a betrayal. He was a soldier. He was trained to eliminate the enemy, not to carry them back to safety. But Max had made his decision. He had stood guard, unwavering. And now Jake found himself forced to make the hardest choice of his life. The alien, barely conscious in Jake's arms, let out a soft groan. Its breathing was labored, each breath sounding like a struggle. Jake's eyes flickered to the creature's face. Though it looked nothing like a human, he saw the faintest signs of vulnerability in its strange, golden eyes. This wasn't just a soldier anymore. This was something else. The forest loomed ahead, the camp still miles away. Jake had to keep moving. Max padded along beside him, his ears alert, his body tense. The dog seemed to sense the urgency, moving faster. With each step, his sharp eyes scanning the trees for any signs of danger. Jake didn't know if he was worried about the alien or about the possibility of enemy soldiers nearby. Either way, he had to get them to the shed before they were discovered. The shed was a small, hidden building at the edge of the camp, far away from the main base. It wasn't much, just a place to store supplies, but it was isolated and out of sight. Jake had built it himself when he first arrived, wanting a quiet place to think. Now it seemed like the only safe place for the alien. Max pushed ahead, sniffing the ground as he led the way. When they reached the shed, Jake was grateful. The door creaked open as he stepped inside, the faint scent of wood and old metal filling the air. He quickly closed it behind him, the lock clicking into place with a satisfying sound. He carefully laid the alien down on the floor, but it didn't make a sound. It was too weak to move, its alien body still covered in blood. Max circled the creature, sniffing it closely, his tail stiff. The dog didn't bark, but Jake could see the unease in his eyes. Something about this situation felt wrong. Jake kneeled beside the alien, scanning its body for any obvious wounds. There were several deep gashes along its sides, and the armor was cracked in several places, revealing skin that was pale and almost translucent. The blood was dark, almost black, and had a thick, sticky consistency. "I have to stop the bleeding," Jake muttered, not sure if the alien could even understand him. He fumbled with his medical kit, pulling out a few basic supplies. He had been trained to patch up wounds in the field, but this was different. He had never treated an enemy before, and this alien wasn't like the ones he'd fought in the past. The creature stirred slightly, its eyes fluttering open. It gazed at Jake with confusion, then something else, recognition, fear. It was hard to tell. "Don't worry," Jake whispered, unsure if the alien could even understand him. "I'm not going to hurt you. Just need to keep you alive." Max barked softly and sat down beside them, watching the alien with a mix of curiosity and caution. Jake was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, Max understood the situation better than he did Dot as Jake applied bandages to the alien's wounds. He noticed something strange. There was no sign of aggression in the alien's posture, no sign of resistance. It wasn't even trying to defend itself. It was as if it had completely surrendered, too weak to fight, too injured to escape. Jake leaned in closer, his voice low. "What happened to you? Why were you left out there?" The alien's eyes flickered again, and it opened its mouth. For a moment, Jake thought it might speak in its own language, but instead, a strained voice whispered, They betrayed me." Jake froze. The words hung in the air like a weight. Betrayed? By whom? And why? Before he could ask another question, the alien's eyes closed again, and it slumped into unconsciousness. Its breathing shallow. Max nudged Jake's hand, his body tensing. Jake looked at the dog, confused by his sudden alertness. He followed Max's gaze to the corner of the shed where a faint shadow shifted. Jake's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his rifle, lifting it high, ready to defend himself and the alien. But there was no sound of approaching footsteps. No sign of danger. Max growled low in his throat, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the corner. The tension in the air was thick, and Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He moved closer to the shed door, trying to peer through a crack in the wall. The woods outside were still and silent, but something felt off. Suddenly, the alien shifted again, its hand twitching as if reaching for something. Jake's attention snapped back to it. But when he looked into the alien's face, he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. A faint, barely perceptible smile curled on the alien's lips. Jake hadn't slept a wink that night. Even though the alien Riva, as he learned, her name-to-be, was unconscious in the corner of the shed, her presence weighed heavily on his mind. He kept running through everything in his head. Why had she been left for dead in the woods? Why was Max, his dog, so protective of her? And most importantly, why hadn't he killed her when he had the chance? The first light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the shed's wooden walls, casting long, thin shadows across the floor. Jake sat on a crate, his rifle across his lap, watching Riva. She hadn't moved since he bandaged her wounds, and the silence in the room was suffocating. Max lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes never left the alien. It was then that Riva's breathing changed. A shallow gasp broke the quiet, and her eyes fluttered open, locking onto Jake's face. He froze for a moment, unsure of what to expect. The last time she'd woken up, she'd been delirious. This time her gaze was sharp, focused. She tried to sit up, but a sharp wince of pain crossed her face, and she collapsed back onto the floor. Jake immediately moved to her side, instinctively reaching out to help her. "No," Riva whispered weakly, her voice rough and strained. Don't touch me." Jake hesitated, unsure of what she meant. She was an enemy, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't like the others. The other soldiers he'd fought had always been cold, ruthless, but Riva was different. There was fear in her eyes. "I'm not going to hurt you," Jake said softly, holding his hands up to show he meant no harm. "You're safe for now." She looked at him, her eyes scanning his face. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. They betrayed me," Riva said, her words heavy with pain. "I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be with them." Jake's brow furrowed. "Who?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "The others," she murmured, her hand curling into a fist at her side. "My unit. I was a scout, sent to gather information, but I found out something. Something they didn't want me to know. And they left me to die." Jake didn't know what to say. He had been trained to kill aliens, not to listen to their stories. But something about Riva's voice, the pain and betrayal she carried, made it impossible to ignore. Why did they leave you? Jake asked, kneeling beside her again, though he kept a safe distance. His rifle was still slung across his back, but his hand was near it, just in case. Riva closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her strength. She opened them slowly, and her gaze was intense. They wanted to erase everything, she whispered. What I found out, what I learned, it was too dangerous. If it got out, it would change everything. They didn't want that. They decided I was expendable. Jake's heart raced. There was more to this than just a simple war between species. This was about something deeper, something bigger. But he didn't know what. What did you find out? Jake asked, unable to keep his voice from betraying the urgency he felt. Riva's eyes shifted, as though she was debating whether or not to trust him. She looked at Max, who had moved closer, now sitting just a few feet away, watching her with calm, unwavering eyes. The dog's presence seemed to reassure her. The weapon. She began, her voice trembling slightly. The one they were building. It's not just a weapon. It's something else. Something that could destroy not just your world but ours too. The moment it's activated, the effects will be irreversible. Jake's mind raced. A weapon that could destroy both worlds? It didn't make sense. What was she talking about? How do you know all this? Jake asked, trying to piece it together. Riva closed her eyes again, a look of deep regret crossing her face. I was supposed to stop it. I was supposed to warn your people. But they decided I knew too much. They planned to erase me before I could speak to anyone. But I escaped. Jake stood up, pacing the small shed as he processed her words. A weapon that could destroy two worlds? If she was telling the truth, it was much worse than any war they had fought. The stakes had just become a lot higher. His mission had been to protect Earth, to keep it safe from alien threats. But this was different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of both their species. Max stood up too, walking over to Jake and nudging his leg with his nose. Jake paused and looked down at the dog, who was staring intently at Riva. It was as though Max understood the gravity of the situation more than Jake did. What happens now? Jake asked, looking at Riva. She seemed to collapse into herself. The weight of everything finally taking its toll. I don't know. If they find me, they'll kill me. And they'll activate the weapon. You need to stop them before it's too late. Jake stood in silence, his mind working over everything she had said. He had no idea how to stop a weapon that could destroy both worlds. He didn't even know where to start. But one thing was clear. He couldn't just leave Riva here. She had information that could save them all. We'll figure it out. Jake said, his voice firm with resolve. We'll stop them. I won't let you die for something you didn't choose. Riva looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else, hope. Jake wasn't sure how he would stop the weapon, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let it destroy everything. Not without a fight. The morning air was thick with tension as Jake paced the small shed, trying to wrap his head around everything Riva had told him. The weight of her words felt like a heavy burden, pressing down on him. A weapon that could destroy both Earth and her world? It sounded impossible, but Riva's fear was real, and her desperation was undeniable. Max lay by the door, his ears perked, his eyes constantly scanning the outside world, alert to any disturbance. The dog knew something was coming. Jake could feel it too. Riva lay on the floor, her face pale and exhausted, but her eyes were wide open, glued to Jake as though waiting for him to make a decision. There was no time for hesitation. They were running out of it. How much time do we have? Jake asked, his voice strained with impatience. Riva shifted slightly, her gaze locked on the device still clutched in her hand. She had been holding it ever since he first found her, the small, sleek object that had caused her so much pain. It was a tracker of some kind. Its glowing light was faint, almost as if it was dying. But the countdown was still ticking. Tick, tick, I don't know, Riva replied, her voice barely above a whisper. It could be hours, it could be minutes. We can't risk waiting any longer. The countdown on the device seemed to mock them. With every passing second, the pressure in the room increased. Jake looked at Riva, then at Max. They were all in this together now. The clock was ticking down on their futures. If they didn't stop the weapon in time, they would be too late to save either world. I'm going to take you to the base, Jake said, his mind racing with plans. I'll need more resources. More information. We can't do this alone. Riva's eyes widened, and she reached out weakly, grabbing Jake's sleeve. No, you don't understand. They'll be watching. If you bring me to your people, they'll know. They'll activate the weapon early. You can't trust anyone not. Even your own commanders. Jake's heart sank. What was she saying? I can't just leave you here, Jake said, his voice rising. We have to stop this, and we can't do it alone. If I go in, I'll bring help. We'll fight together. But Riva shook her head weakly. You don't get it. The moment you bring this device to anyone else, whether they're human or alien, it's over. The weapon will activate. It will target us both. The gravity of her words hit him like a hammer to the chest. If they didn't act fast, they would lose everything. His training had taught him to fight, to protect. But this was different. This was a war against time itself. Max growled lowly, his body stiff, and Jake could feel the dog's protective instincts growing stronger. Whatever was coming, it wasn't far off. It was as if Max knew the enemy was already closing in. The hairs on the back of Jake's neck stood up, a gut instinct telling him they weren't alone. Riva's breathing grew heavier, and she clutched the device even tighter. They're coming, she said, her voice trembling. They know I'm here. They'll find me. They'll find us. Jake's heart raced. Much closer, Jake's mind snapped into action. He looked at Riva one last time, his gaze firm. We're going, now. He scooped her up, his movements fast and practiced, trying to ignore the fear that was beginning to creep up on him. Max was already at the door, ears perked, low growls vibrating in his throat. The dog knew what needed to be done. Jake opened the shed door slowly, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the camp. The enemy wasn't far. They had to move before they were spotted. Riva leaned against him weakly, her face grim as she looked around the shed one last time. You don't understand, she repeated. You'll need more than just your dog and a plan. You need to destroy the device, destroy it before it's too late. Otherwise, the countdown will continue, and everything you know will end. Jake's pulse quickened as he moved toward the woods, Max at his heels. He was starting to feel the weight of Riva's words pressing on him, as if the fate of two worlds was already hanging in the balance. The woods ahead were quiet, almost eerily still. Every step Jake took felt like he was walking deeper into danger. His mind kept flashing to what Riva had said. Destroy the device. How could he destroy something that was already so deeply connected to the weapon? What if the device was a part of something larger, something even more dangerous? Max stopped suddenly, his body going rigid as he sniffed the air. Jake's instincts kicked in, and he lowered his rifle, his eyes scanning the trees around them. Something was wrong. The woods were too quiet. Too empty. Then he heard it. A faint rustling in the bush just ahead. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He motioned for Riva to stay back and crouched down beside Max. The dog was alert, his body tense, ready for whatever came next. Jake's hand hovered over his rifle. He wasn't going to wait for whatever was out there to strike first. Then the bushes parted, and Jake's eyes narrowed as he saw the figure that emerged. The quiet of the woods was shattered as Jake and Riva pushed deeper into the trees. Every step felt heavier. as if the very ground beneath them was trying to hold them back. Time was slipping away faster than they could move, and every passing second felt like a countdown. The device in Riva's hand blinked faintly, a soft pulse of light that matched the increasing beat of Jake's heart. "Do you think they've noticed?" Jake muttered, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. Max stayed just ahead, his nose twitching, alert to every sound, every movement. His low growls told Jake they weren't alone. Someone or something was out there. Riva's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a weight of urgency. "They know, they always know. The moment I escaped, they sent scouts. They won't stop until they find me. And they'll use this device to track us." Jake's breath caught in his throat. She was right. The device was a beacon, a signal, to whoever was hunting them. It wasn't just a countdown to a weapon. It was a countdown to their destruction. Max barked sharply, snapping Jake out of his thoughts. He followed the dog's gaze into the thicket. There, through the trees, he saw movement. A figure darting between the shadows, too quick for Jake to get a clear shot. "Stay down," Jake hissed to Riva, pulling her behind a tree. Max's growls grew louder as the figure stepped into the clearing. Jake's hand tightened around his rifle, ready to fire. The figure was an alien scout, just one. But still, it was too close. If they didn't act fast, they'd be surrounded. Max's low growl turned into a full-throated bark. The alien turned sharply, its eyes locking onto them. "Go!" Jake shouted, pulling Riva to her feet and sprinting through the forest, Max right behind them. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The scout would have seen them, and the others wouldn't be far behind. They ran, branches slapping against their faces, their feet stumbling over uneven ground. Jake's mind raced with every possible escape route. He had to get to the camp, but getting there without being spotted was nearly impossible. The woods were too open, too exposed. Behind them, Max barked again, more urgent this time. A rustling sound followed. Too many feet moving through the trees, too many of them closing in. Jake felt the weight of Riva's body, the fragile hope she represented, slowing him down. If they didn't find cover soon, they would be caught. "We're almost there," Jake said between breaths, pushing through the dense undergrowth. "We just need to." A sharp, sudden pain shot through his leg. Jake gasped, falling to the ground. He'd barely registered the shot that had struck him. His focus pulled to the sharp, burning sensation in his calf. "Jake!" Riva screamed. Kneeling beside him, he gritted his teeth, trying to stand, but his leg wouldn't move. He reached for his rifle, but it felt heavier than it should have. The world around him blurred as the adrenaline started to wear off. His vision darkened at the edges. "Stay with me." Riva's voice cut through the haze. Her hands were shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding, but it wasn't enough. Max snarled from a few feet away, his ears flattened against his head, growling fiercely at the alien scout that had followed them. "Max!" Jake called, his voice strained. The dog was still facing the scout, eyes locked, but not moving. Jake could hear his low growls deep in his chest, steady, determined. He knew the dog wouldn't leave him. But the scout Jake knew that one shot had already been enough to set them all on edge. Riva's hands were trembling as she glanced at Jake, panic starting to rise in her eyes. "You can't die, we need to move." Jake knew she was right. They couldn't afford to slow down, not now, not when everything depended on them. "Listen to me," Jake said, his voice rough as he gritted his teeth. "You take the device. You take it, and you go. I'll hold them off. I'll catch up." "No," Riva protested, tears welling up in her eyes. "I won't leave you." Jake gripped her arm with the strength he had left, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You have Tio, if you don't, it's over. You have to destroy that device, and I'm the only one who can stop them here. Go, now." For a moment, Riva hesitated. But in her eyes, Jake saw something shift, a decision, a choice. She nodded, pulling herself together. With one last look at him, she stood and dashed toward the trees, the device clutched tightly in her hand. Max growled again, but followed her, knowing the mission wasn't over. The dog cast one last glance back at Jake, then vanished into the thick woods. Jake was alone now. His leg burned, but he forced himself to rise, the pain sharp and insistent. He steadied his rifle and turned toward the alien scout that had approached too close. "You won't stop me," Jake muttered to himself, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Not this time." The pain in Jake's leg was unbearable, but he pushed it aside. His breath came in shallow gasps as he limped through the underbrush, his rifle still clutched tightly in his hands. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves underfoot. His mind was focused entirely on one thing. REEV, Adachi had to be safe. He had sent her away with the device, and now the mission was in her hands. But Jake knew that with every passing minute, they were closer to being surrounded, closer to everything they had fought for slipping away. "Max!" Jake shouted, though his voice barely carried through the dense woods. He hoped the dog was nearby, protecting Riva. His loyal companion had never failed him before. Then, a distant bark. It wasn't the usual playful call. This was different. It was sharp, urgent. Jake gritted his teeth and pushed through the pain, forcing himself to move faster. He couldn't afford to slow down now. But as he made his way through the forest, he heard something that made his stomach drop. The unmistakable hum of alien technology. The same kind of weaponry used by the scouts that had been hunting them. They were here. Max's bark grew louder, more frantic. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. He had to make it to her. He had to. The world around him seemed to close in as he limped faster, his legs barely holding him up. Every step felt like a battle, but he couldn't give in. Not when Riva was counting on him. Not when the fate of both worlds depended on what happened next. Finally, he broke through the trees and came upon a clearing. There in the center stood Max's fur bristling, teeth bared, and eyes locked on a group of alien soldiers who were closing in fast. The dog's stance was defensive, but it was clear the odds were against them. "Max!" Jake yelled, but the dog didn't look away. Instead, he lunged at the closest soldier, his jaws snapping. Jake didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, striking one of the alien soldiers square in the chest. The enemy stumbled back, but there were far more than Jake had anticipated. Max, never one to back down from a fight, kept moving, leaping at another soldier. But it wasn't just the aliens he was worried about. In his weakened state, Jake knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He needed help, he needed to regroup, but there was no time. Max was the only thing standing between them and certain death. "Get back!" Jake shouted, stumbling forward. But Max wasn't listening. The dog was in full warrior mode, darting and weaving between the soldiers, taking them down one by one, but there were too many. Jake's heart twisted in his chest as he watched the dog fight with all the strength and courage that had kept him alive through countless battles. One of the aliens lunged forward, its sharp claws aimed straight for Max. Time seemed to slow as Jake took aim, but his leg gave out beneath him. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud just as the alien soldier reached Max. "No!" Jake screamed, but Max was faster. The dog darted to the side, avoiding the alien's claws and sinking his teeth deep into the soldier's neck. The alien let out a screech of pain as it collapsed to the ground. Jake's pulse raced as he struggled to get back to his feet. He could barely move, his leg barely functional, but he wouldn't let it stop him. Max was still fighting, his every movement fluid and precise, but Jake could see the toll it was taking. The dog was bleeding from several cuts and scrapes, but he refused to stop, refused to give up. Then, something shifted in the distance, a flash of movement that caught Jake's eye. He knew exactly what it was, "Riva," he whispered to himself, a wave of relief flooding through him. She was coming. She had to be coming. Max, hearing the familiar sound of Riva's footsteps, looked back for a split second, his eyes locking with Jake's. The dog's gaze seemed to say everything. "I'll hold them off, but you have to hurry." Jake nodded, pushing himself to his feet. He limped toward the fight, each step harder than the last. But the sight of Max fighting so fiercely gave him the strength to keep going. With one final burst of energy, Jake reached the melee. He fired another shot, hitting another enemy soldier in the chest, causing the remaining scouts to retreat, but not without a price. Max had taken a brutal hit, a slash across his side, and now he was struggling to keep his footing. "No, Max!" Jake yelled, but the dog wasn't giving up. Even as his wounds began to slow him down, he stood tall, his eyes locked on the enemy, daring them to come closer. Max turned to face Jake, his tail wagging slightly as if to reassure him. And in that moment, Jake knew that the dog wasn't just protecting him, he was protecting them both, to the very end. Riva reached them, her breath coming in gasps as she knelt beside Jake, pulling out something from her pack. It was a grenade, a last resort, a weapon she had been carrying since they first escaped. "This should stop them," Riva said, her voice trembling with fear. But Jake knew it was more than just a weapon, it was the last chance they had. He grabbed the grenade from her, his hands shaking, but his resolve firm. "Max," Jake whispered, his voice breaking. "You've done enough, boy. We're almost there." With one final look at the dog, Jake pulled the pin and threw the grenade at the group of soldiers. The explosion rocked the forest, sending shockwaves through the ground and scattering the remaining enemies. When the smoke cleared, Jake and Riva were left standing, their eyes locked on the wounded dog who had given everything to keep them safe. Max limped over to them, his steps slow but determined. "We're not done yet," Jake said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "But we wouldn't have made it without you." Max gave a low growl of approval, then collapsed beside them, finally allowing himself to rest. The world had gone quiet, the aftermath of the explosion still lingering in the air. The smoke from the grenade hung thick, curling through the trees like a mist, and the distant sounds of retreating footsteps told Jake everything he needed to know. The enemy had been pushed back for now, but victory came with a heavy price. Max lay on the ground, breathing heavily, his body coated in blood and dirt. His usually alert eyes were dulled with exhaustion, but they still held that unwavering loyalty, that bond he and Jake shared. It was the same loyalty that had kept him fighting against impossible odds, a loyalty that had cost him dearly. Jake dropped to his knees beside the dog, his heart aching as he ran his hands over Max's side, checking for any more wounds. Dog's body trembled under his touch, but there was no growl, no snap of warning. Just exhaustion. Riva, her face pale and her eyes wide with concern, knelt beside them as well. She reached out gently to touch Max's head, but she seemed unsure, like she was afraid to hurt him. "Will he be okay?" Riva asked, her voice tight with worry. She was exhausted too, but her attention was solely on the dog. Jake didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure Max would survive this. The injuries were severe, and the blood loss was enough to make even Jake's stomach turn. But Max had always been more than just a dog. He had been Jake's partner in every battle, his constant companion through the worst of it all. And now, in the most critical moment of their lives, Max had saved them. "He's more than just a dog," Jake whispered, his voice filled with a deep, raw emotion. Riva looked at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Jake took a deep breath, his fingers still gently stroking Max's fur. "He's family. You've seen it, Riva. He's been protecting us, fighting for us. Like he's one of us, not just a pet, not just a soldier. He's something more." Riva's gaze softened, her eyes filling with understanding. She looked at Max, then at Jake, and for the first time, she seemed to see the dog in the same way. Jake did. A silent warrior who had given everything for them, who had risked his life in a battle that wasn't his to fight. Max gave a faint groan, lifting his head slightly before collapsing back onto the ground. It was clear the dog was barely holding on. Jake's chest tightened as he leaned closer to Max, brushing the dog's ears gently. "You've done enough, buddy. You've done more than I could ever ask for. You've kept us alive." A low whine escaped Max's throat, and Jake could feel the dog's heartbeat slowing. Riva reached out hesitantly, resting a hand on Max's side. "He can't die like this," Riva murmured. "Not after everything he's done." Jake nodded, his face grim. "I don't think he's ready to go yet. We'll find a way. We have to." For a moment, the three of them sat there, surrounded by the quiet woods. The battle had passed, but their fight was far from over. The device Riva had been carrying was still with them, and the threat of the weapon that could destroy both worlds still hung over them like a shadow. But in this moment, none of that mattered. Max had given his all to protect them, and Jake wasn't going to let him down now. "We need to move," Jake said finally, his voice firm with a new resolve. "We can't stay here. But we need to get Max back to the camp. We need to help him." Riva nodded, her face set with determination. "I'll carry him if I have to." Jake looked at her, and for the first time, he realized how much she had changed in the short time they'd been together. She wasn't just an alien scout. Anymore, she was someone who had become a part of this mission, someone who was willing to fight for them. She was family now too. The three of them, Jake, Riva, and Max, had fought through the impossible, and they weren't going to stop now. Together, they had already faced death, betrayal, and destruction. But now, they were fighting for something more than survival. They were fighting for the future. "Let's go," Jake said, his voice steady, though his heart ached. "Max is with us, and we're not leaving him behind." Riva stood first, her eyes filled with quiet strength as she helped Jake to his feet. Max remained where he was, but he looked up, as if understanding the gravity of what they were about to do. With a grunt of effort, Riva lifted the injured dog into her arms, and Jake led the way through the woods. As they made their way back to the camp, the woods felt different. They were no longer just survivors. They were a team, family bound together by the trials they had faced. They would survive this, whatever it took. In the countdown, they were running out of time, but with each step, Jake knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together.